The last few years have been pretty good for the representation of brown people in American cinema. If we set aside the racism we've always faced and look at the art we've been able to make. Within white-made television, our roles are shifting, from background to meaningful supporting characters. Almost every major film festival contains a couple of our films in the lineup, and a young brown student got into USC's film school? How did that get in?
This is not part of the commercial! Is some jerk making your life miserable?
I got a bag, I see it. Soon I touch the A, I hit Benzie. Lord blood, Lord forgive me. I might find the ops and Disney.
In the last few months, I watched season 1 of Deli Boyz, created by Abdullah Saeed, a nice Indian boy, Roshan Setty's third feature film, and Mogul Mowgli, a now 5-year-old British film by Pakistani-American auteur Bassam Tariq. Watching these three works in relatively quick succession had many thoughts brewing in my head, but first and foremost was, I think we're building something here. Despite their vastly different tones, genres, and budgets, although no one's given a fucking Desi a lot of money, there are clear similarities. And it may seem obvious, but I think the prevailing theory for so long has been that brown diasporic filmmakers are extremely diverse and from different countries, not just in South Asia, but Trinidad, Guyana, or Fiji, so we're not monolithic. And yes, we're a pluralistic society of nationalities, religions, and languages, but I think there's a really interesting convergence happening here because we share what's most important. Art. In our motherlands, it's difficult to create filmmaking that unites all citizens, especially because of linguistic barriers. However, in the diaspora, English is associated with each individual, connecting us, while classic traditions of cinema, music, and storytelling still subtly inform our work. I think your average non-Desi could watch Deli Boyz, A Nice Indian Boy, and Mogul Mowgli and find no commonalities, aside from the color of the director's skin. But I think there's some obvious trends developing. Now, I passionately encourage everyone to watch these three projects. Deli Boyz is streaming on Hulu now, A Nice Indian Boy is in theaters, and Mogul Mowgli is streaming on Max. But I'm going to analyze each of these and give a little plot summary in case you don't have the time or one of the 1,000 streaming services you need nowadays.
Make some noise for the Desi boys!
Easily the most fun and tailor-fit to my taste, Deli Boyz follows Asif Ali's Mirdar, the straight-laced brother, and Sagar Sheikh's Rajdar, the stoner brother, heirs to their father's Darko fortune. The third protagonist is Purna Jagannathan's lucky auntie, their father's right-hand woman. I think there's so much to unpack within just the pilot, and I don't want to spoil it, as I'd love for everyone to watch this and get it renewed, so I'm not going to discuss much of the season as a whole. In the pilot, Mirdar and Rajdar's father is killed, and the FBI takes advantage, raiding their headquarters, leaving the squabbling brothers destitute. This forces second-generation men who benefited from the material abundance of immigration back to the beginning. They have to work at the first deli their father ever opened and get the dark side of the business up and running again. One of the most important moments for me in the whole series is the conversation that the two brothers have right before their father dies in front of their very eyes. They discuss how one should reckon with the benefits of being the children of immigrants. Raj believes in a sort of hedonistic solution, and Mir believes in honoring those who came before. So, although these aren't mutually exclusive, I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had on which the entire series attempts to deliver. One of the uniquely modern brown American immigrant dilemmas is, do you enjoy your benefits or lament them? Due to the requirements for immigrating to the United States from India, Pakistan, and other South Asian countries, we often quickly succeed with degrees or seed capital. It's sort of obvious when you look at our mean and median salaries. They exceed our immigrant counterparts as well as white Americans. So this poses an interesting problem. For other immigrant groups throughout the history of the United States, the journey to wealth and abundance was multi-generational. Although there were immediate improvements to quality of life, the disparity between, say, the victims of partition and their upper-middle-class New Jersey, Bay Area, or Texan descendants is pretty stark. Take a look at someone like Vivek Ramaswamy. In no world is being a pharma millionaire turned Republican politician something that honors your roots, even if you marry a brown woman and raise your kids Hindu. With the two main characters of Mir and Raj, Saeed gets the chance to explore this forking brown American trolley problem on the backdrop of a hilarious black comedy. Tonally, the series is very masala. For those who are unfamiliar, masala cinema is the Indian blockbuster style since the 1970s, often attributed to screenwriting duo Salim Khan and Javed Akhtar that blends action, comedy, romance, and melodrama by embracing a full depth of surprise and emotion. It's kind of annoying to me that a lot of crime comedy gets lumped in as a Tarantino style when it's really a very long existing cultural element of Indian cinema. For example, one of the most important Hindi films of all time, Sholay, embraces the outlaw figure and has a darkly funny comedic style.
Suicide!
अरे भाई ये सुसाइड क्या होता है अंग्रेज लोग जब मरते हैं तो उसे सुसाट कहते हैं.
Obviously, some of the film style can be attributed to westerns, specifically spaghetti westerns, but it's not like Sergio Leone is the funniest guy in the world. Much of this masala style was invented by the unique melding done by Indian writers and directors in the mid-70s. I would argue that angry young man cinema and its genre is extremely important to how India has conceptualized its films since then, and for those of us in the diaspora, it's even more so. From the 70s to the early 2000s, certain films were exported to us and became uniquely popular for Americans or Brits versus the community back home. Johar understood this and started catering to our market, which in the long run wasn't the best decision, but it created some very influential films that I can't deny my love for. As such, the most important films for NRIs are actually distinct from the most important films made for Indians. I've seen Indians in India on social media make fun of us for making our entire personality about specific late 90s, early zeros Hindi cinema. I get that it's a little silly, but you can't understate just how important DDLJ and K3G were for us. Before streaming was big, those were the two films that we all had access to on bootleg DVDs. Speaking of Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, Tujhe dekha to ye jana sanam. A Nice Indian Boy premiered at South by Southwest on March 12, 2024, but its history extends a decade back. Adapted from a play by Madhuri Shekhar by TV writer Eric Randall, it began as a USC Master's in Playwriting thesis, first being staged by the East-West Players in Los Angeles. A Nice Indian Boy, the play, is in the lineage of the British Victorian-style drawing room play, which was highly influential on mid-20th century Indian theater. It can be quickly explained as Guess Who's Coming to Dinner or Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but way more farcical. In Eric Randall's adaptation, he expands the play, brilliantly transmuting a living room tale told with the 5 central characters into a time-jumpy rom-com a la Four Weddings and a Funeral. Interestingly, the director and actor also have a history going back a few years. Starring Karan Soni in the lead role, the film is directed by radiation oncologist Roshan Sethi, his partner and collaborator in lockdown-era 7 Days. Sethi entered show business by creating, writing, and advising multiple medical procedurals like The Resident. Accordingly, A Nice Indian Boy follows Naveen, a gay Indian doctor struggling to imagine a happy future in heteronormative Indian/Hindu marriage culture. Although Naveen is the clear protagonist, the classic Indian family of 4 he is a part of are just as relevant. The stubborn and strong older sister, Arundhati, the emotionally detached father, Archit, and the loving but sometimes too much mother, Megha. In all of the 3 works that we're discussing in this video, complex paternal characters are extremely important. In cinema back home, the father figure is a critical archetype, but I think it's uniquely relevant to us in American society because there's an even stronger divide between our parents' generation and ours. For me, my parents were born and raised here, so my work often doesn't reflect on these divides as much, but I think if you're a millennial or a Gen X child of immigrants, this is a much more front-of-mind question. Millennials in general are teased for making fiction in which their parents apologize to them because that would never happen in real life. And I think that's sort of a true joke, but it's a little more acceptable in diasporic film because we're exploring a cultural divide rather than just saying my boomer parents are assholes. In a Q&A that I attended, Madhuri Shekhar emphasized that she was sick of brown films that exclusively vilified the parents' generation. Demonization is especially a trend in film and television written about us, but not by us. It's easy to make a story in which the glory of Western society is a heroic liberating force for brown women. And I'm not trying to minimize the sexism of our society, but this type of film is racist. It is a metaphor for the defeat of our culture through American individualism because it's necessary for capitalism. Something like A Nice Indian Boy is tremendously fair to all of the main characters while never diminishing the suffering Indian patriarchy inflicts on Arundhati. Beyond the parents in this film, there's also a very prominent motif of Ganesh. I think it's safe to say that this film is probably the first to feature a mute cute in a Ganesh mandir. I'm glad to see a film that isn't conservative, embracing religion in a liberatory way, especially for queer characters. The 3 works I'm discussing all do a great job of protecting religion from the hands of conservatives. Saeed, Sethi/Shekhar, and the writer-director I'll discuss in a moment, Basam Tariq, reclaim narratives around Hinduism and Islam in Western society. I think it's very important for leftist art to embrace religion, because if we don't, who will? Shitty racist people, probably. Ganesh as a remover of obstacles is a very common motif in Hindu art. In this film, there are a few crucial scenes featuring Ganesh guiding the path for the main character Naveen. In a scene that I don't want to spoil later in the film, Ganesh serves even as artistic inspiration for Naveen. This muse-like relationship alludes to the invoking of Ganesh and Saraswati at the beginning of artistic works. Ultimately, A Nice Indian Boy is nice and unashamedly Indian and Hindu, enough that I'll forgive them for the crime of having a white love interest, and it helps that the white love interest happens to be Jonathan Groff.
Sometimes I feel like Manto, drink my pain away, I stay smoking on the fronto.
Unlike the very lighthearted Deli boys in A Nice Indian Boy, Mogul Mowgli is an unrelenting film crumbling under its somber weight. It's by no means flawless, but I'm so tremendously glad that there are people in our community making things like this. Bassam Tariq's first foray into filmmaking was Ghosts of Sugarland, a docu-short about a young black Houstonian kid who converted to Islam and was eventually radicalized into joining ISIS. A topic clearly close to Tariq's heart, he weaves together a few interestingly shot interviews with a couple scathing moments. Despite the film not being narrative, it has the hallmarks of immigrant guilt and grappling with brown, particularly the Muslim man's, status in the American racial hierarchy. Following the release of Riz Ahmed's career-defining performance in Sound of Metal, he starred in this film, unfortunately and coincidentally very similar, leaving Mogul Mowgli in its shadow. It's important to note that Mogul Mowgli began as Mogul Mowgli when Tariq met Ahmed in 2017, and Darius Martyr didn't cast Riz for his film, then called Metalhead, until 2018. The film sees British-Pakistani rapper Zed get his big break until he's struck by a mysterious autoimmune condition, and therefore replaced by a clout-chasing brown rapper he despises, RPG. As allegory for intergenerational trauma, the disease destroys his career and romantic relationship, but allows him to reach some reconciliation with his father, Bashir, portrayed by Ali Khan, whom you may know from films like Luck by Chance, Dawn 2, or Archie's. In one of the best sequences of the film, Zed goes to a masjid but steps out to smoke. He's confronted by a fan who believes him to be RPG, and after initially approaching him just for a picture, the interaction spirals as the black fan alleges that all Desi sell out when they get a little clout, and ultimately, it becomes violent. Initiating a fight, Zed collapses, his legs functioning no longer, marking a strong shift from the occasionally funny opening that's characterized by Zed's bravado to the pessimism of the rest of the film. The central symbol of the film is Bishan Singh, and the allegory is the short story to which he belongs, Toba Tek Singh. Written by legendary Urdu writer Saadat Hasan Manto, the story is a dark satire of post-partition Punjab that captures the feelings of a listless, depersonalizing refugee experience. Saadat Hasan Manto's short story Toba Tek Singh takes place in a Lahore mental asylum 2 or 3 years after partition, when the governments of India and Pakistan decide that their asylums ought to exchange patients based on religious affiliation. Hindu and Sikh lunatics are to be relocated to India, Muslim lunatics to Pakistan. Upon catching word of this news in the Lahore asylum, the patients are utterly confused about the birth of this strange and unfamiliar country called Pakistan. Just as Frantz Fanon believed that French colonialism produced his patients' symptoms, we can read Manto's patients as suffering from mental illness due to colonial rule. I think all immigrants can relate to both Toba Tek Singh and Mogul Mowgli because it captures this abandonment and inherited anguish from the feelings of partition. Manto's own experience of partition and his attempts to grasp the reality of a radically different geographical landscape in South Asia gesture at the uncanny, confronted by that which was meant to be familiar. After all, the majority of the people he encountered in the cities he traveled through shared a similar ethnic makeup, cultural traditions, and languages, and realizing that it was violently made unfamiliar wreaked havoc on Manto's mental health. He suffered from alcoholism, which would ultimately kill him shortly after he wrote Toba Tek Singh. This fate is nearly identical to this work's protagonist, and aligns with the pangs of guilt that Zed feels for his past of shoving his culture away. Bishan Singh becomes very distressed upon hearing about the impending exchange between Indian and Pakistani asylums, and abandons his usual gibberish to ask everyone who comes his way which of the two countries Toba Tek Singh is located in. A patient who calls himself God tells Bishan Singh neither in India nor in Pakistan, because so far we have issued no orders in this respect. Mogul Mowgli is an incredibly nuanced film that calls out the more generic forms of repping Pakistaniness or Islam or brownness more broadly that celebrities have done for the last few generations that feel incomplete and personally untrue. I think it's my favorite of the three because of its ambition and third cinema influence. It's not non-linear, but it has moments where the polish of a bigger budget film chips and shatters through repetition and looping, a core technique of these avant-garde filmmakers. But before I get ahead of myself, let me find the commonalities of these works and explain to y'all what third cinema really means. I've divided the comparison section into 3 categories: themes, techniques, and trends. Within each of these, I also have 3. You can see I like symmetry, word to Wes Anderson. As I've discussed, the 3 biggest themes that I've seen in brown American cinema are guilt, religion, and family. These compare together in wonderful ways because religious guilt is potent, familial guilt is maybe even more so, and family is intrinsically tied to religion. These 3 themes are dominating the work that we make because they're simultaneously what set us apart but also align us with the rest of American society. I mean, Catholics have guilt. White people have families. Need I say more? Grand narratives of Shakespearean familial struggle are at the core of brown novels, films, and poems. It almost seems silly to label it as Shakespearean because we were doing it 1,000 years before William even conquered England. However, I just think it's an easy shorthand to explain in English what our narratives are and everything from the Mahabharata to Pushpa the Rule. As for religion, it's obviously different religions depending on the work we're discussing. To be sure, the apparatuses of colonialism vastly reconstituted and objectified religion, and made colonial, post-colonial, and even diasporic subjects identify themselves according to exclusive criteria, whereby religious identity became a political category and a language of association. However, because religious identity was politicized, the process of immigration and life as a political entity in a new nation can help to neutralize these biases. But let me not get ahead of myself. That's for the conclusion. The three techniques are music, genre blending, and color storytelling. Music is definitely a theme in the work that we make as well. It's very important to Mogul Mowgli as Zed is a rapper, but we're just a very musical culture. Tujhe, Dekha, though, the song in DDLJ, is a motif in a nice Indian boy, and that's more on a cultural level than a storytelling or filmic level. Genre blending and tonal shifts go along with the aforementioned masala style and the ancient concept of navarasa, which we can loosely translate to the 9 emotions, which is very baked into the way that we write. There's very few Indian films that are just one genre. We really believe in an all-encompassing story that takes you into a new world, family, and breadth of emotional experiences. Color storytelling is an interesting one because I think it originates from our culture's emphasis on fashion. In Bollywood and Tollywood, but also all of our linguistic film industries, we place a huge emphasis on costume design, especially in our musical numbers. This is translated to color-focused storytelling because our indie films don't contain flashy songs and set pieces with dozens and dozens of dancers in bright orange lehengas. Instead, this has become reformed and subconscious, finding itself in toned-down yet emotionally charged color storytelling. And if you don't know what I mean by color storytelling, a simple, practical example would be a happy character wearing yellow clothes in a blue room to analogize their internal joy and their sad environment. And lastly, the trends. A blend of American cultures, economic inconsistency, and Desi stars as the adults. This is sort of my miscellaneous section, as you can tell, that occurs both in front of and behind the scenes that I think maybe may change in the next couple years. As immigrants, we see the two Americas in front of us, black and white, and assimilate to both or pick one. For example, Raj in Deli Boyz captures a lot of the brown men of a younger generation who were more enthralled by black culture. You can argue whether they caricaturize black culture or honor it, but a film like Mogul Mowgli takes the other side, where Zed is an artist in the undeniably black art form of rap, but also fights with the black guy who considers brown culture more white aspiring. On the other hand, A Nice Indian Boy is about the duality between white and brown Americans and doesn't play into a racial plurality. Naveen's best friend is an Asian guy, but I'd assume they did an open casting call without specific race because that character doesn't feel racialized. I mean, he is a doctor though. Economic inconsistency ties back to the immigrant dilemma that Saeed forms in Deli Boyz because we have a poor immigrant class and a rich descendant class. Despite our economic success in this country, I don't want to homogenize us. There are brown people here or in Canada or the United Kingdom that are struggling, and that creates disparate sections of our diaspora to explore. The era of distinct national industries is dying as international productions and streaming are creating a single global film industry, making it very easy for American film productions to access older B-list Indian actors to play the parents. All right, before I wrap this thing up, let me just add some little caveats that I wasn't able to get to. There is a Hindustani, North Indian, and Hindu or Muslim bend to our films. There aren't many Sikh or East Indian or Sri Lankan film productions. It's clear which brown people are making things. There's also a male lean to it, which is a problem in the demographic of directors across all, religions and races. These change the epistemology of our work because there's a smaller group making films, but I think there's a lot of potential. The process of immigration strips people of some of the problems they have in their motherlands. I don't know how radical an opinion this is, but I think the diaspora can break down caste more than would ever be possible in India. The biggest obstacle to that being immigration is less accessible to Dalit and Adivasi people, which we need to address, but coming to a new location in which we're equalized can be a massive leap forward. It's a hopeful thing. Maybe it's delusional, but I think it's very possible. Now, with those caveats out, let's talk about my thesis that I've been building to for however long this video ends up being. Towards the Third Cinema is a seminal manifesto written by Argentine filmmakers Solanas and Jatin. Everyone who has gone to film school since the late 70s has learned about it, and I assume everyone who goes to film school for the rest of time will too. Their theories are the basis for the oppositional filmmaking of anything that is outside of the Hollywood or auteur system. They are the inspiration for the title, and they are also the inspiration for where my head is at. Inspired by his analysis of Kashmiri author Agha Shahid Ali's The Country Without a Post Office, Datta brought to my attention the concept of a poetics of rupture, of holding themes of of coherence and disruption, continuity and breakage, the global and the local, and sustained tension with each other through the volume. Although Deli Boyz and A Nice Indian Boy are comparatively far less politically charged works, this tension is prevalent throughout. What their work demands of us in response, particularly as readers looking from the outside in, is to remain responsive to how a decades-long crisis inflects the parameters of poetry. An encounter with Agha Shahid Ali's poetry, therefore, should at the very least unsettle our presumptions about what we are willing to demand and recognize as poetry from a besieged people. And this concept can apply to filmmakers too. However, I'll be honest, I don't think that we're going to get any extremely shattering, revolutionary brown cinema in the immediate 5 years. But we're moving to a global unified filmmaking space. Take the small instance of modern legend Anurag Kashyap, a born and raised North Indian, abandoning Hindi cinema to permanently move to the South. As the film industry moves forward, artists will be able to go where their themes are best served, and that can lead to evolving counterculture and niche filmmaking that can form something unprecedented. In the motherland, there's a complete dearth of art cinema. Ravi Vasudevan, film scholar and co-editor of Sarai with Ravi Sundaram, wrote on this gap in his 2011 book, The Melodramatic Public. Majumdar writes that he observed only 4 areas of Indian cinema with visibility: popular formats, diaspora productions, international collaborations, and documentary films. For each of these subsets, art cinema would be an inaccurate label, as of right now. I admit that many of the diaspora productions and international collaborations are popcorn-munching attempts at earning dollars, pounds, and rupees, but financial incentive is only how it begins. Art soon follows. As I identify what brown American cinema is, I'm being expository. I'm simply stating. I'd argue that in the future we'll reach a point in which we have our own style and motivations for filmmaking, a world in which we break down not only the racism against us, but also the plethora of institutions and structures within our society, whether it be religious, caste, or linguistic divides that are tearing us apart as a people. Immigration unifies communities that never would have seen each other as brothers in their homeland. I myself am half Uttar Pradeshi, half Bengali, and my parents only met because they were in America. Our culture is a beautiful yet fragmented one, but our cinema can unite us if we do it right.
It's my audition.